Hi there and welcome to Soundpaint. My name is Troels. This video is an Adastra scoring walkthrough. I've written an insane 8-minute piece with these gorgeous strings, and really just trying to demonstrate all the different sides of the libraries, from the glorious arcs to the beautiful and expressive sustains. It's strangely intimidating sometimes to record these videos here because certain sample projects are very personal. Adastra is probably the most personal sample project I've ever embarked on, and it's the product of almost a decade of research and retakes and learning about samples, but most of all, learning about human emotion. I don't know about you, but for me, I've bought so many libraries over the years, so many string libraries with glorious promises, that when I sit in front of the keys, I can command a full string ensemble with all their emotion and richness that a real string ensemble can offer. And too many times I've been let down. When you are in sample sessions, you have to record with emotion. And as you can imagine, sample sessions can be very static because you have to record every single note the orchestra can possibly do. In this case here, both violins, violas, cellos, basses recorded as separate sections, so you have full control over them, and then the ability to put them together, as we're going to demonstrate in this video here. This track was actually written as a short note demo for violins, but it turned out to become a full-fledged demo, really sort of broadcasting the whole width and depth of this beautiful library, whether it's the arcs, whether it's the wealth of short notes, whether it's the sustains that to me almost work as well as legato themselves, because I have 127 different velocity layers of expression on the mod wheel. It's just a whole different ball game when it comes to expression. Let me show you what it can do inside of the DAW, just playing the demo right out of the box. This entire track was written 100% organically with Soundpaint. I can just do things here that I've never been able to do before, and I can't wait to show you, because we're no longer chained to the technology. Soundpaint allows me to do things I've never been able to before, and it truly feels like every time I press a key that I'm almost touching the string of a violin or a cello or the other instruments. It's really hard to explain, but it's an incredibly emotional experience, and to me it fulfills the promise that Colin and I made each other many years ago, which was to find the holy grail in string sampling. I think this library at least touches upon that in several places. One thing I love about demos, to me, this has always been the tradition of making demos. You remember the old radio stations you could sort of dial through and get into different channels? It feels like that. You're just trying to showcase the libraries from so many different sides. And it's just such a fun process and such a unique way of writing music, because I can just change whenever I get tired or impatient. And Lord, am I impatient in this demo here. Let's take it from the beginning here. I'm playing with the arcs. The arcs are doing something that you just cannot do with sustains and with any other means. Even though we have the best sustains I've ever tried, you can get very close. There is just something to these arcs here. The first minute or so in the track begins with the violins playing concertino. Concertino means with mutes on the strings. And these are arcs with mutes. It just has that most beautiful silky sound that I would much rather just play like here and not having to worry about mod wheel, whatever. This just feels right. And when I play them, I never play to a metronome when I do this kind of stuff. I really try to hear what is the sample telling me. But as I mentioned, this is a violin demo, so what you're hearing at the beginning is not basses and cellos or violas, it's actually violins playing as basses. Check out what happens when I play them down here. An unusually low violin, and down here you can play it as a bass as well. That's violins with mutes on them. What we're doing in Soundpaint is that every single instrument has infinite range on the keyboard, so you can play all instruments outside or inside their natural playing range. Because the violin has so much tension, so much vibration on the high strings, when you take them down, the note is very stable, almost more stable than a bass. You can hear basses sometimes get a little bit detuned, but this thing here, that's pretty tight pitch. Let me go to the next section here as well, and I'm adding a little bit here. One thing I love to do is to play the arcs and then do tremolos on top of them. It just gives this beautiful sort of almost fragile, unstable shine. Now, you may have noticed on that very last note that it started bending. Also for me, like when I work with a computer, like I don't have to treat the orchestra exactly how I normally would. This is just a tremolo being pitch bent down. You'll notice here on the pitch bender here, it just gives a cool vibe. You'll notice as well, when you look at the CC data here, that for example, with these guys here, that I'm using the mod wheel very, very delicately to really feel I'm there. So when I write here for stuff like this, it's all about just how I feel. I mean, it's so simple when you see what's going on here. It's just a single note playing up and down. But I'll just sit and feel it and really listen to what would it feel like with a real section? What would the tremolos be doing? How would they be perfect? Now, it helps when you have a great supplement. In this other section here, I also add a little bit of extra bass coming from a Juno 60. There's a particular program that I made called Soft Film Bass that I highly recommend. It's like the warmest, most filmy bass of all time. It may not sound like a lot on its own, but when you put it in context, all of a sudden you get that massive sort of subwoof bottom, but keep it very, very low in your mixes. Don't go high on them. Just have them subtly where you can slightly hear them. It's important you can hear them. You don't want underneath that range. Let them be in there, but as a very, very soft, velvety couch that you can just lean your music back into, but not overwhelming. And if you notice here, like things are coming a little bit late all the time. For me, that's just what happened. If I was conducting a piece like this, I would give time and space enough for the notes to breathe emotionally and sort of weave in and out of existence. So when I play this way here is also an emotional process for me. I sort of wait a little bit and try to be patient. And I often like to breathe when I'm composing as well, trying to sort of what feels right in terms of the breath of the music as well. When it comes to the breathing of the music, that's also why I never work on the grid with these things here. Don't have any metronomes, anything like that. This is not rhythmic music in that sense. This is flow state. So any form of rhythmic element for me sort of just takes me out of that. So just score with your heart, score with your ear. You'll notice here that I'm massaging the CC a little bit on the modulation side, my mod wheel here, just to sort of create that sort of swelling expression. For example, here in the last chord here, you'll notice sort of goes down and then it sort of swells into when the music opens up a little bit. Rise. And I actually think I wrote this part here first. This is an example of what you can do with the short notes here, almost synthesizing them at times. One thing I love about Soundpaint is that I'm no longer sort of step bound by the samples like I am in Contact, for example. I can easily make them acoustic and then sort of slowly take those acoustics and shape them into something new and then go back to acoustics. But this is actually a good example of the marriage between deep sampled analog instruments and really an appreciation of acoustics. Putting them together, you can really just appreciate like, oh, the analog has the warmth, the natural variation. Every time I play a note, it's not the same. Doing exactly the same in the acoustic realm, using real halls. So an enormous amount of attention to detail, but when it all comes together, just like when you're cooking, if you have great ingredients, the likelihood of your meals being really delicious or sounding good in this case here are just a little bit higher. So for me, I love working with the highest grade sonic ingredients. It just gets me there a little bit quicker from a production point of view. But these are just the violins playing spiccatos, so very sort of feathery, bouncy bow motions. Now, there's a lot going on in this part here. I remember the first part I created was these Bartok sort of arps and sort of playing with them again in terms of bending, whether they're acoustic or hybrid or natural or supernatural. They don't sound completely natural, and the ear might go like, wait, that's not a Bartok, like that sounds like something was chopped off, and it is. I'm using the offset button here and I'm modulating it so I can control how much offset I have on them here. So if you go down here, they're going to sound more natural. But I felt that was kind of a little bit too sort of messy production-wise, so I wanted to tighten them up. And because there's so many notes and it's a full ensemble playing each of those notes, using the offset could give me a cleaner sound. And I actually like this more. And if you listen to that part here, you'll notice that I'm gradually modulating the Bartoks here by using the detail knob here in the offset rack here. If you ever want to do this, just go into the racks here and open offset, and then that will give you that control. And if you ever want to control that with your mod wheel, you can just right click here, say add MIDI CC automation, and then move whatever controller. I'm moving my mod wheel right now, and now I can control it fully. Try to follow it down here when I'm playing this next piece here. You'll see how I'm gradually sort of loosening them up to their natural state as a part of the expression. This is Bartok expression. Moving up, and then sort of slowly letting it go. It's my firm belief, just like we talked about with the ingredients, that if I cook well, not just having good ingredients, but if I cook respectfully with them, for example, use area articulation to express myself a little more, then the totality of that painting will be a little more detailed, and one can just hear and appreciate that attention to detail. These are really good playable marcatos. When we recorded them, think of like intention in the note. Even when it's a short note, you can still have attitude as a player. You can still be there emotionally. That's what we got here. So these are not static marcatos. Da. There's a little bit of a swoop on the end of the sound and then a little more grind on the attack, though we have them many velocities as well. These are emotional marcatos, if you will. And in context. And I think like the more time I've used in the box, the more time I've learned to appreciate acoustic instruments, which I really think are the instruments of the future, and the computer is just playing catch up right now. So to really appreciate them, every single instrument at the same level with a humble nature, and understand that the real world is infinitely complex. And while AIs and many other tools are slowly scratching on the doors of reality, there's nothing like holding a real instrument in your hand, being able to touch the strings and feel life vibrate through it. So that's in many ways what we're trying to do inside of Soundpaint as well. And the Bartok ARP is still running through. It was sort of by accident, but this thing actually runs through most of the piece here. Let me just add a few more strings so you can hear the strings isolated. So we had the violins earlier playing basses, but in this case here, I added cellos and basses, but I actually played the basses outside their natural range as well. So we have subwoof basses on top. So that's why it's a very bass-rich piece. That's a real bass. Beautiful, right? You can hear the hall in the sound. This is one out of many reasons that Colin and I like to record in real halls. You get such beautiful, natural imperfection in the sound every time you play. It's a new sound generated, which is also one of the beautiful things about Soundpaint. We virtually have, in many cases, infinite round robin in our samples as well. It's really just like more musical sweetness. So as you get familiar with Soundpaint, one will realize that all instruments live together. So it's very easy to pair unusual sound sources together. For example, here, I took the spiccatos of the violins. I used the offset so they got a more sort of synthetic flavor. And then I added a Juno 60 arp. Let me just isolate that too. And then I coupled or married the two. Just the perfect like arpeggiation sound, but again with more natural acoustic sources inside of it. So, well, the analog is natural and acoustic as well. So it's just coming from two different worlds, the analog reality and the analog synthesis, I suppose we can call it. And also a shout out to our Majestic Percussion, which is a 20-piece percussion ensemble playing orchestral percussion, lying in the background and sort of providing. It's amazing how many ensembles we have, glockenspiel ensembles, but of course we also have like deep percussion ensembles. In this part here, I don't know why, but I was thinking back to some of Shostakovich's old symphonies and sort of just having that sort of unique melodic thing that is going in a different direction. I have no idea what the chords are called or anything like that. It just sounded right to my ear in terms of being a little bit contrastful to the somewhat otherwise harmonic composition. And you can also hear in itself, it sounds really alive, but the notes are not always super precise. I added a flute to that as well. And in context. And this is also a part where like, did I really need to write a whole bass section for that? And it's like, yeah, I kind of did. Like, it's been a little bit like lying in its groove, playing its melody, but it also shows that the rest of the orchestra is equally invested. And this was by some magical composer's mind, really deliberately written for all parts of the orchestra. This last section here is playing violins and violas and cellos in spiccato fashion. So when I write on the grid and quantize, I'll always do this thing. I go in here, I highlight it, and then I find my humanize function. All DAWs will have this. It will randomly play around with the notes a little bit so they're not completely on the grid and you can control to what amount you want that. It just helps shake everything up. And then I play loosely with other instruments like glockenspiels and others will be played in hand. And that sort of gives that sort of tight feeling and yet musical. And yes, the Bartok ARP is playing in the background here as well. It's kind of wild. Not the prettiest thing on its own, but I just like that sort of sound of a lot of players playing, and it's a little hard to hear what's what, but it's just a gorgeous sound. So even though we just humanized everything, I just felt these guys here. Let me just try to remove them. Let's listen without. It's nice, but with them, it's just a little more alive, I think. And uniquely enough, the bass is coming from a pizzicato played with a violin coupled together with a Juno 60. Well outside the natural playing range of the violin. It's just a crazy thing you can do. And then the whole thing just ends with a gentle arc. I want to say that this demo took me about a week to write, fairly extensively and really putting hours into it every day. And for me, I realized when I was done with it, and I spent about like 30, maybe 40% of my time mixing. So when I'm done with a composition, I'll go back to it many, many times. I've listened over 100 times to this composition. I have 55 different renders of it. Just going through all the different iterations and just listen to it in the car and, oh, I don't like what it's doing there, and just work on the mix. For me, mixing is super important about composition, something we don't talk about enough. It's really a part of the toolkit for the ear. You can't create these unique castles here if we don't know how to build the foundation. Anyway, I hope this was a little bit of an intro into Adastra, or at least one way of using it. We have other tutorials also demonstrating the strings from many, many other points of view. We have tutorials where we go through the individual articulations, the legatos, the sustains, and all that stuff. There are many things I haven't covered in this video, but I want to say that maybe my favorite articulation is the non-vibrato to vibrato sustains on the keyboard here. I didn't use legato in this demo here because I never felt I needed it. It's just sometimes the sustains in the library are so good. I use them maybe 60% of the time that I can really just do what I want with them. I can do arcs as well for that matter. But sometimes, as you can see in this demo and the other tutorials, like, you do need to use legato and arcs and all the beautiful other parts of Adastra. I hope this has given you a little bit of an insight into how to score as well. As I mentioned, my approach is very unconventional. I don't have schooling. I didn't have a teacher teaching me how this works. So it's purely an exercise of the ear and the heart for me. And I always think about like how unique it is when you spell out the word heart, that the ear lives inside of it.